Crimson Desert stands out as one of the most ambitious open-world games ever made. The sheer amount of gameplay systems and variety is overwhelming, and this ambition extends beyond gameplay to the technical side as well. The game is built on Pearl Abyss's in-house Black Space engine, and what's truly impressive is how the team has delivered a massive, breathtaking, and visually stunning open world despite the sheer scale of the project. This is reflected in its rich environmental variety, impressive long-range draw distance, and a high level of detail. All this while maintaining stable performance and virtually no noticeable traversal stutters or shader compilation hitches. But unfortunately, this visual splendor and smooth performance are undermined by several distraction visual issues. One of the most noticeable of these issues is pop-in. Many elements appear or load very close to the camera even at the highest settings. While some degree of pop-in is understandable in a large open world, the frequency and proximity here feel excessive and noticeably distract from the overall experience. Another significant visual issue, and arguably even more noticeable than pop-in, is the ray tracing flickering and boiling. This tends to be especially visible in indoor environments and indirectly lit areas. The main reason behind this is the unconventional ray tracing approach the game is using. I don't want to go into full detail as that would require a dedicated video, but the main point is that instead of relying on higher ray counts per pixel, which is computationally expensive, the engine uses a surface-based radiance cache system. In simple terms, the engine fires fewer rays and then uses a combination of surfals and radiance caches to sample that lighting and reconstruct it for the remaining pixels. This saves performance but at the expense of more visual artifacts that manifest as flickering or boiling. There are settings available to reduce this noise, but as we'll see later, they come with a substantial performance penalty. And to better understand these trade-offs, as well as those for the other graphics settings, we'll examine the performance and visual impact of each one, and the goal is to determine the best combination for optimal performance while maintaining good visual quality. So, let's get started.
There you are, perfect timing as always. Sit down, dig in.
Let's kick off with the upscaling options. The game supports FSR3 and FSR4, and on the DLSS side, both DLSS 4 and 4.5 are available, with all presets exposed in the menu, which is great to see. Between DLSS 4 and DLSS 4.5, several issues stand out and affect each differently. The first problem with DLSS 4 is how it handles the rain effect. Notice how the rain particles are far less visible compared to DLSS 4.5 presets or even FSR3. The same behavior extends to other particles such as leaves, where DLSS 4 shows more ghosting and trailing. But at the same time, DLSS 4.5 shows more noise, as you can see here, which becomes clearer in this example. As expected, preset L and preset M does not work well with RT effects, and with DLSS 4 preset K, the noise or flickering is less obvious. The last difference I notice is in regular shadow maps, particularly the distant mid-range lower quality cascades, which look more flickery with DLSS 4.5 compared to DLSS 4. Now, when comparing FSR3 and DLSS presets side by side on the 36C Ti at 1440p using balance mode, DLSS 4.5 as expected is noticeably more expensive to run on this GPU, with around a 16% drop when moving from DLSS 4 to 4.5 preset M and up to 26% for preset L. On the 4070 Super, this time using quality mode instead of balanced, the cost is much lower, around 8% from DLSS 4 preset K to DLSS 4.5 preset M and 12% to DLSS 4.5 preset L. At native resolution, there is a noticeable problem in this game when using DLAA. As you can see here, switching between DLAA and DLSS quality shows a clear difference. DLAA produces a noticeably softer image. This behavior is consistent across other DLSS modes as well, including performance, and it affects DLSS 4.5 presets as well, although it's less severe in this case since DLSS 4.5 already applies increased sharpness. The exact cause of this issue is not entirely clear, but it's most likely because the sharpness path gets disabled when DLAA is engaged. Now, comparing the native anti-aliasing options, including the game's TAA and FSR3 native AA, We can see that the game's TAA looks unstable and exhibits more shimmering compared to FSR3 native AA. DLAA, on the other hand, delivers a more stable image, but the softness is obvious and leads to a noticeably blurrier presentation overall. Let's move on to the graphics settings, starting with few options that don't seem to be working properly or at least show little to no visual impact without any measurable performance cost. The first is Advanced Weather Effects. I tested multiple scenes with rain and could not spot any meaningful difference in either visuals or performance. Even the lightning effect looks identical with this setting on or off. The same applies to other effects, such as the water running off this roof. As you can see, there is no visible difference. The second setting is Effect Quality. Just like the previous one, when looking at various scenes with fire, smoke, and other special effects, there is no noticeable difference. The third setting is Water Quality. Here we can see a small visual difference where waves leave behind foam particles after hitting the rocks before fading away, or here where there are slightly more effects when interacting with this water surface. But as you can see, there is virtually no performance impact between the options. The next one is Simulation Quality. Here, testing elements that should be affected like cloth physics and foliage movement does not reveal any significant differences. The only minor change I noticed is here, where after destroying these tents, they remain visible slightly longer before disappearing when using cinematic. The last setting in this list is Post-Processing Effect Quality. This one has one noticeable difference. Moving from low to medium enables some lens effects. Like here, we're looking at a bright spot from a dark area, or here with the lens flare effect. And in terms of performance, I could not measure any meaningful difference. So even though these settings currently have little to no impact on visuals or performance, I would not recommend pushing them all the way to cinematic, as they may become relevant in other scenes, or their behavior could change with future updates and they suddenly start costing performance. So for now, the safest option is to leave them at the middle preset, which is high. As for post-processing, you can lower it depending on your preference for lens effects. Now let's move on to the other settings, starting with model quality. This one affects the mesh quality and overall level of detail of the geometry. It also controls displacement and parallax mapping, which are used extensively in this game and give surfaces much more depth and detail. However, this comes with a side effect in the form of flickering. Since the options from medium and higher enable this effect, they show more flickering compared to low. Additionally, in other scenes, low completely removes the deformable snow layer, as you can see here. Regarding pop-in, as I mentioned earlier, even with ultra or cinematic, the pop-in is still noticeable, but it's much less severe than with the lower options like low or medium. Performance-wise, there is a 4% hit when going from low to ultra and 10% when going further to cinematic. So for this one, I recommend high or ultra. Next, we have texture quality. This setting has a relatively subtle impact, with the most noticeable improvement occurring when moving from low to medium. Beyond that, the differences are minor, only slightly improving detail on some NPCs, as you can see here. And given the game's rather subpar texture and asset quality combined with the heavy pop-in, VRAM usage remains relatively low. Even 8GB is more than enough to run cinematic textures. That being said, there is one issue I encountered while testing with cinematic. Sometimes after loading a save, certain assets and textures fail to load properly. Lowering the texture quality to ultra resolves this issue, and switching back to cinematic afterward worked as well, but since cinematic does not provide any meaningful visual improvement, I recommend keeping texture quality at ultra. Moving on to shadow quality, this one mainly affects the resolution of the game's shadow maps. Low and medium produce lower resolution shadows compared to the higher options. Performance-wise, low and medium perform similarly, while the higher options come with around a 5% cost. So for this one, you can use medium if you need the extra performance, or go with ultra for better shadow quality. Next, we have ray tracing. Visually, the impact of enabling or disabling RT depends heavily on the selected lighting quality. For instance, when lighting quality is set to low, ray tracing has little to no noticeable impact. And the same applies to medium, where the differences remain very minor as you can see here. Starting from high and above, the difference becomes much more apparent. Disabling ray tracing results in weaker bounce lighting, flatter ambient shading, and low quality reflections. And this remains consistent all the way up to max lighting quality as you can see here. Additionally, in some scenes, turning off ray tracing can actually lead to more flickering and visual artifacts, like here with ultra lighting quality. The performance cost of ray tracing also varies depending on the lighting quality setting. At low and medium, where the visual impact is minimal, enabling ray tracing comes with around a 6% cost. But at ultra, the difference is much smaller, around 3%, and the same applies to high and cinematic. While at max lighting quality, the 6% performance cost returns again. So overall, I see no reason to disable ray tracing in this game, especially since lighting quality, as we'll see next, does not have a significant performance impact from low to ultra. So let's move on to lighting quality. This is by far the most crucial setting in this game. Visually, as its name indicates, controls the quality of the game's global illumination. Starting from high, we begin to see a significant improvement, with more surfaces and objects properly affected by the indirect lighting, and increasing it further continues to refine the results. This setting also affects specular lighting or reflections. From high to cinematic, we get more accurate reflections, while moving to max significantly increases their resolution. And this increase in resolution is also visible in global illumination, particularly in noisy scenes like this one. From low to cinematic, there is noticeable flickering, whereas at max, the flickering is significantly reduced, though not completely eliminated. However, in indoor scenes with these archy shadows from lanterns and artificial lights, we can see that max actually increases the flickering on these shadows compared to ultra or cinematic. Performance-wise, there is a 4% hedge when going from low to ultra, 10% to cinematic, and a whopping 44% when moving to max. So generally, I recommend ultra, and if you have a small performance headroom, cinematic is also a solid option. Related to lighting, we also have DLSS Ray Reconstruction. Now, I won't go too deep into this one, mainly because it's extremely demanding and forces the use of max lighting quality, which doesn't make much sense in the context of this video. But briefly, enabling this feature helps reduce flickering and noticeably improves overall lighting quality, as you can see in these examples. However, it also introduces its own set of issues. In some cases, surfaces can lose some of their depth and detail, and there is the oily, slightly blurry look that we've seen before with this technique. There are also scenarios where Ray Reconstruction introduces its own noise, as shown here. In terms of performance, as mentioned, this feature is very demanding. On the 36C Ti, I measured around a 40% performance drop when enabling Ray Reconstruction, while on the 4070 Super, the cost is lower but still significant at around 28%. So if you are struggling with performance or barely hitting your FPS target, enabling Ray Reconstruction is not a good idea. Next, we have reflection quality. This setting mainly affects off-screen reflections. At low, these reflections are completely disabled. Moving to medium enables them, and going higher improves their quality. Performance-wise, the impact is relatively small, with around a 3 to 4% cost when going from low to cinematic. So for this one, I recommend using ultra or cinematic. Moving on to foliage density, the setting adjusts the amount of foliage, such as shrubs and grass, both up close and in the distance. Visually, starting from high, the differences become very subtle. And performance-wise in this scene, there is a flat cost of 4% when moving from low all the way to cinematic. So given the small visual improvement, I recommend keeping this setting on high just to stay on the safe side. Let's move on to volumetric fog quality. Looking at some volumetric effects, like this light shaft shows only a small visual difference between low, high, and cinematic. For other elements such as volumetric clouds, the difference is more noticeable. There is a small improvement from medium to ultra and a slightly more visible one when moving to cinematic. In terms of performance, in this scene there is around a 2% cost when going from low to ultra, and roughly 3 to 4% when moving up to cinematic. So similar to foliage density, there isn't a strong enough visual gain to justify using cinematic. Therefore, I recommend keeping this one at high. Lastly, we have particle effects quality. This slider adjusts the quantity of most particles effects in the game, including leaves, as you can see here, as well as rain particles. Performance-wise, this can have an impact depending on the scene. For example, in this scene with dense leaf particles, there is no noticeable performance difference. But here, when attacking and generating a lot of particles, we can see a 3 to 4% cost from 0 to 100. And the same applies here with the rain as well. So overall, if these particles don't bother you, I recommend keeping this slider close to or at 100. So given everything we've discussed so far, these are my recommended settings for Crimson Desert. Now let's compare the performance between the optimized and max settings at 1440p using DLSS for balance without Ray Reconstruction. Starting with this town, which is one of the most demanding areas in the early hours of the game, here we can see on average around 47% performance uplift when using the optimized settings. Next, moving to the desert area, the gain is slightly higher here at around 51%. Now, to be fair, a large portion of this improvement comes from lowering the lighting quality. As we saw throughout the video, most other graphic settings don't scale that well in terms of performance. The last thing worth mentioning is CPU performance. Maintaining 60 FPS or higher in this game depends heavily on the CPU, particularly in dense scenarios like here in the famous Bug Hill. As you can see, the high enemy and AI count significantly impact CPU performance, with the Ryzen 5 3600 dropping into the low 40s. Now, this isn't representative of all the content in the game, but during heavy combat scenarios, you should expect some drops if your CPU is not up to the task. Before ending the video, I want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon. If you are able and would like to directly support my work, consider becoming a patron to get access to the highest possible quality of my latest videos, including this one. And a big thank you to all my supporters, and thanks to you as well for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if not, leave a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.